Hello, my name is Marina Frateroli, and I just felt inspired to tell my story about my journey to the Catholic Church because, yeah, it's something I'm really proud of. And I just thought I kind of wanted to put the story out there and let other people have access to it if they wanted it. Um, yeah. Um, so basically, it's currently March of 2025, and this journey began almost almost 5 years ago. And I wasn't looking for a journey. I wasn't looking for a change. I was just living my life. Um, I was in COVID. I was a recent college grad. I graduated from Duke University, and I think I had been like truly happy for a while. I was recently broken up with a long term boyfriend. There were just lots of things in my life. I lost my job due to COVID. I was working for an art fair, and that got canceled due to COVID. And so I was just kind of looking for another way to pass the time when I downloaded Twitter. And I had for a long time I was a religious studies major, and I had for a long time followed various religious communities on the internet, and I just found it so fascinating to like learn the different assumptions um, and aspects of those communities online. So I had one friend, Russell, who had liked a tweet from a account that I believe was called Tradcat Veils on Catholic Twitter, and basically that was my foray into Catholic Twitter. And I read about veiling, I read about like traditional masses, and I was just kind of hooked. I was like, this is fascinating. I know nothing about any of this. I don't really know Christians who veil other than like I had one Orthodox friend. And I was just curious about this whole school of thinking and this kind of traditional movement in the Catholic Church, and it was just very interesting. But I remember spending a lot of time on Twitter for like a week straight, just getting engrossed in these different accounts and their perspectives. And along the way, pretty soon, I came across the term National Eucharistic Revival, and that term really stood out to me. I had grown up Presbyterian, and I was baptized Episcopalian, but grew up in the Presbyterian church. And I'd learned about revivals in like AP US history class, and to me that was something I'd been really proud of. That like Christianity was such a part of American history, and so I I like the term revival. It drew me in, and so I looked it up, and I found information that the Catholic Church was having this revival because faith in the Eucharist had kind of dwindled over the years, and that they were trying to re-engage that. And it made me realize, like, oh wow, Catholics have this idea called the Eucharist, and it's just like communion, but it basically things connected. Like, okay, I had heard of transubstantiation in my sixth grade history class, and that's what this is. This is the Eucharist, and they believe that because it's literally Jesus, that it's like super important and a big part of the Catholic faith. And I just never really realized that. Like, I had never contemplated like what would it mean for communion to not just be a symbol. And I was curious. It sparked a true curiosity. So right, in Florida at that time, and so I soon went to South Carolina, and I actually had to have a Catholic grandfather, Jeepers, my dear grandfather, and we had gone to mass with him throughout the years, but it wasn't like firmly in our mind that this is different. And he lives on an island in South Carolina, and so he kind of went to like a sleepy vacation parish. Which is more invigorated now than it was when I was little. Shout out to Holy Spirit on John's Island. But I went with him to a mass, and I was really curious this time. Like, I was excited to kind of like check it out. And like, I had read stuff online, and so I was excited to like boots on the ground, see what mass was like for the first time, like, ever really paying attention to what was going on, because it wasn't, like, different to me than, like, Episcopalian services or anything like that. So one thing that really struck me when he took me to Mass one Sunday during COVID was he was about to get surgery on his spine, and so he was quite wobbly and shaky and weak in his legs, but yet he made the effort to genuflect all the way down to the ground, take a beat there, and then shakily got himself back up. And it really struck me because I knew he was doing it for me in a way. Like, I knew he was showing me that, like, that's the right way to do it. And I'd never noticed him do it before. And given his health at the time, I knew it was really painful for him to do. So it left a very big impression on me. And it was a moment where I was like, oh, he's kneeling before the altar and before the tabernacle because of, like, he's doing this grand act that I've never seen done in a Protestant church because of the Eucharist. Like, there's this great tradition of devotion, and, like, I didn't know whether or not he really had a devotion to the Eucharist at that time, but, like, you know, he's practiced, the Catholics do that because of this great devotion. And I was just sort of connecting genuflection to the Eucharist and my own faith. And I realized, you know, like, oh, like, my Italian side was probably all Catholic, and, like, passed this faith down to him. And I realized, like, oh, like, this might be a part of my history. And another thing that I sort of encountered online that summer was, I remember, I think I maybe followed a couple Instagram accounts that were Catholic, and I came across a post about Mary Magdalene, and it truly just made me weep. And it made me weep because I was very interested in, I don't know, I guess, let me just say, I saw the post, and basically it was analyzing Mary Magdalene as a woman of faith. And Mary Magdalene is this character, this woman in the Bible, and we see her in, named in the Gospels. But, like, I had never really thought about her. And what this little brief Instagram posted was, it meditated on what it is to be a woman following Jesus, and what it is to, like, wait at the foot of the cross, or, like, wait by the tomb, and, like, trying to, like, just, like, explicated, like, the spirituality that she has to teach us. And it made me cry because I was like, this woman's been in the Bible, and she's had all this to teach us this whole time, and yet I was never taught this, even though I went to, Sunday school every week my whole life, and, like, Bible study, like, all throughout middle school and high school, and, like, into college, and, like, there's so much for us to learn from her. And, like, why don't we do that as Protestants? Like, I was like, women are never talked about, basically. I mean, like, the women in the Bible are sometimes talked about, but not to this depth, and not, like, learning this deep Jesus-centric spirituality from them. And I was just kind of thinking, the only, like, real people we talk about outside of, like, the main characters in the Bible stories are, like, these Protestant theologian men. And, like, when there's, like, these women right there to learn from, I was just like, whoa, like, I feel like I've maybe been missing a lot here, and, like, that my tradition, like, maybe is lacking something, like, in particular with learning from these great Christians over history. And then that kind of dawned on, like, that's what the saints are. Like, these are Christians throughout history, Christians in the Bible, and, like, we have something to learn from the way that they have faithfully responded to the gospel and faithfully been a servant of Jesus. And, like, just like, we all have our unique walk, like, they all had their unique walk, and we need to learn from them. And I just realized, like, oh my gosh, there's this whole like, thousands of year history of all these saints, and, like, I need to start learning from them. Like, I learned so much from this little Instagram post about one woman in the Bible. And so that was another thing where I was like, okay, wow, like, that's probably another kind of pillar of ancient Christianity that I'm, like, not really, that hasn't been passed down to me. And So those are some of the things that kind of percolated in my head. I will say, because I was on some sort of like trad internet circles, I went to a Latin mass that summer, and I actually I had a negative experience. It just like wasn't a very welcoming parish, and I kind of felt like unwelcome and like maybe like they don't like outsiders coming. I tried to dress very modestly. Like I went up to be blessed, and they wouldn't do the blessing, and I have to say that that was discouraging as someone who was like seeking out. I was like I wore a scarf on my head. I was veiling, trying to be as respectful as possible, but it did turn me off, and I didn't go back to mass for probably like 6 months after that. Um, but I ultimately did because providentially I moved to New York that fall, and my house was on the same block as a Catholic church, and so I would go to that mass sometimes. I still went to Presbyterian church when I moved to New York City, but I would sort of mix in the Catholic church sometimes. I'd like either take the subway down to the Presbyterian church, or I'd go onto the Catholic church, and eventually just like 2 minutes down the way, and eventually it definitely made an impression on me in New York City that I had about five Catholic churches in walking distance, and yet I had to like leave my neighborhood to go to the like right kind of Presbyterian church. And it was the first time I had like physically city planning like understood like wow, the Catholic Church is big, and like wow, this is what it looks like to have a universal church. And that it brought up memories for me being in France. And I have gotten to spend a little bit of time in France in middle school and then in college and after college. And I always wanted to go to church in France, but there was never a place for me to go because like I was PCA, Presbyterian Church of America, and like I didn't know where to go. Like I could go to a Methodist American church, or like there was a Baptist church, but like they didn't feel like they were really for me, and they weren't my way of practicing Christianity. And that always left me very uneasy, and like my spiritual life wasn't as good in France because like there wasn't a natural place for me to go worship there. And then I kind of began to see like, okay, wow, like I actually have been in a lot of Catholic churches in France because of how beautiful they were, and I kind of saw them in like a tourist or like art history purposes, or even just walking through my neighborhoods. And it once again was like, okay, wow, like this is the beauty of Catholicism. Like it's throughout the world, like unified doctrine, like not the same kind of fragmentation we're dealing with in Protestantism. So I had moved to New York to start law school, so yeah, Columbia, and it was a really tough year. It was hybrid year, so the vast majority of my classes were totally remote, and like it was just not really like it had been such a weird time, and then like suddenly I'm getting like cold calls through a computer screen, and it was just not good for me like and as far as an academic experience was, and it was very stressful, and kind of like stopped investigating Catholicism. I had like enough on my plate, and I just got sucked into that whole thing. And all the stores in New York were closed. It was you were banned from entering in them that winter of 2020 going into 2021. And I remember in February the stores opened, and I was so glad because I'd been spent so much time been stuffed in my apartment. And I went on a walk, and there was a bookstore opened in a neighborhood I wasn't in an area I'd never been to, and I've actually never been back to. And I went to this bookstore, and I'm a bookstore frequenter, but I'm not a bookstore purchaser because I know I already have too many books, and I never buy books there. But I went in, and I was perusing the books, and I picked one up, and I was just like, felt like compelled to buy it. Just like from within. I was like, I need to buy this. Like it was like must buy. And I knew that I saw that it was a Spanish woman wrote it, about 500 years ago. And it was like a hefty book. And I knew just from my basic knowledge, like, that's pretty crazy that a woman had such a lengthy tome 500 years ago. Like that's an atypical circumstances in terms of like woman authorship. Like that is an unusual circumstance. And I didn't know what the book was. it didn't register to me that it might have a Catholic nexus, but I started reading it and I loved it. It was like very personal, very intimate. I myself like have been a journaler since I was like could write, and so it felt very like kind of like a diary, read like a diary to me. And this woman was talking about her prayer life and her growing up and her childhood and her illnesses and her struggles and her pains, and like those were all things that I deeply related to and subjects I thought about in my own life. Like I love thinking about my childhood. I myself have struggled with really debilitating illness. And there were just some things that she said that I just so deeply connected with. And she talked about like uniting her pain to Christ and like various things that I was able to just like take, and immediately it just bore such spiritual fruit in my life. And basically, I didn't know what this book was. All I knew was I basically knew that I felt led by God to buy it. And it turns out it was St. Teresa of Avila. My translation was called The Book of Her Life. It was actually a Buddhist woman, I believe, who translated it. It was not a Catholic edition. But yet, after I read that, I was like, oh, this woman is a saint, like, like Mary Magdalene. And I had seen somewhere on the Catholic internet space, like, the saints find you. And I was like, well, she found me. And she is brilliant, and I need to, like, she's got it. And basically after reading that book and realizing she was not only Catholic, not only a Catholic nun, not only a Catholic saint, but a doctor of the church, St. Teresa of Avila, my patron, I knew that I had to join the Catholic Church. And right then, that month, I told my boyfriend at the time, like, oh yeah, I'm becoming Catholic, even though he was not a fan of that. Like, and then it was later that month, I got COVID, and I got it really hard. And I was so sick. Someone with a different understanding of the hospital system, who doesn't have such a negative association, would have gone to the hospital. Like, I was so weak. For weeks, I was just very, very ill. And so this is the law school semester. And so, like, I'm approaching finals. And I know I'm really weak physically, but, like, it's kind of starting to dawn on me, like, I'm super weak mentally. And I just like there were just little things that normally I could just like follow. I could normally just like read a little paragraph and like get a basic understanding of it, and I would read it and I'd be like, this means nothing to me, like I can't understand these words. So I couldn't read really, and so I'd try to watch a video, and I'd watch these little short case videos that'd be like, here are the facts and here's the law, and I couldn't even begin to understand the sequence of facts, and I'm like, oh no, my brain is not working. And then I was talking to people, and I realized I heard like that COVID had like brain fog as a symptom, and I was like, I guess I have brain fog, but like I don't even know because I don't even know what's going on. Anyways, that was the beginning of my COVID, then long COVID journey, and that was really, really, really tough. And I dove into that time so I basically knew I wanted to become Catholic, but then this very odd season began where I didn't really know what was happening, and like time passing wasn't really registering to me very well. And so like I was like dabbling, going to like Catholic churches here and there, and like trying to educate myself, but it was very odd time. So I came back to school like knowing that I wasn't quite well, trying to start my second year of law school, and I began OCIA. And basically the only thing I remember really doing that semester, even though I was going to class, every day, was like OCIA. Like it was the only thing I could like kind of tune into. Everything else was an utter blur. And I was really excited to be in OCIA, and like I felt really sure like that's where God wanted me. He wanted me joining the Catholic Church. But yet, as the semester went on, like I had spoken to some doctors, and they were like, surely this weird condition you have isn't going to last more than 6 months. And like, September is the beginning of the semester, so just like try it out. We're now in like October, like I'm not getting anything. November comes, and basically I'm just like, I don't know what's going on. Any class, I'm not better, I'm worse, or just as bad. And I think I have to drop out of law school. And this is a really big challenge for me because I also would have to drop out of OCIA to go back home to Texas, where I'm from, Dallas, Texas. And I just think that God wants me to join the church, and this is really confusing why I have to like leave school and leave OCIA to go back and recover from whatever's going on. And but I did, and I left school, and like God really provided for me in that season, with my amazing grandfather being like encouraging me, to take the time I needed to heal and going back home, and it was a really hard season, of recovery, and like meeting with doctors who didn't have a lot to offer me given the newness and the mystery around my condition. But I was very physically weak. I was sleeping like so much of the time. And now we're talking like I've been sick for like a year at this point almost, and like still very physically weak, still just like basically hanging on. But yeah, but like God had his plans, and I do think that time ended up being a real time of healing for me. But what it really was it was a time where I just had to like let go. Like I just had to like trust God. Like I was like a real reset. And even just like leaving New York City and like then like leaving Dallas again to go back, like I was just like I kind of was like cut free from like a lot of the habits that had been going that I had brought into that age. I was just like deeply, deeply humbled because my intellect had like gotten me really far in life, and then to have that removed, like I just had to trust God. Like I was just like, all right, God, like I've thought I'm like a pretty like clever person, and clearly you can just take that away. So I guess I just have to like surrender everything to you. And so yeah, it was a profoundly humbling experience. Really hard, a lot of like uncertainty, a lot of like, okay, maybe everything I've worked towards is like gone forever. A lot of maybe like my favorite parts about myself are like gone forever, and like all I have to do is like accept that and move on. So it was like a very formative time for me, even though it was atypical. And I got to come back to New York and then start law school again, after working for a summer, and I got to re-begin OCIA. And this time I do think like while I still wasn't like fully with the program of what it meant to join the church, like with that experience, I was much more of a just like a receptive person, because I had to receive so much challenge, and I had to carry so much burden that like I like God just prepared me for that season. And so I started OCIA, and I was in a semester long expedited OCIA course, and I missed the first session because I was like not very good at getting organized, but I did it, and I learned so much. And we were going through the UCAT, a great resource that the Catholic Church has, and I have to say, like, there were some really tough teachings for me. Like, I had to really think about Mary, even just a little. And actually, someone on Twitter had sent me a huge amount of books. And, like, this person later deleted their account. I don't know who they are. But they sent me, they sent me my first rosary. They sent me my first Catholic Bible. They sent me Scott Hahn. They sent me Brant Petra. They sent me so many books, many that I have not even yet read. But so I'd gotten to like be a little exposed. However, like I hadn't been able to read very well because of my illness. And so it was this season where I was really yearning to learn, but I also like had a lot of my assumptions and my beliefs that were not in alignment with church teaching. And so I was on this journey, and I basically knew that I didn't have the full intellectual capacity that I would like to have being on this journey. Like, I would like to be able to, like, read everything St. Thomas Aquinas has to say, but, like, I don't have the time, I don't have the capacity. Like, that's not where I am. I just had to have faith. And that's what I did. I just had faith. But like, I had to have faith, but at the same time, like, there were real intellectual foundations to why I joined the church, with respect to how the Eucharist fit into the Bible. And like, I was deeply convinced, based off of the Last Supper narratives and based off of John 6 in particular, that like the strongest reading of the Gospels include the highest theology of the Eucharist, and that is what the Catholic Church teaches. And I had believed like so much about the saints, and I also like, there's another big part of my journey where I realized that in my Protestant American upbringing, I had an absolutely misinformed idea of what authority was. And this really came up in my civil procedure class, before I got ill in my first semester of law school, when like I had to like really wrestle with the concept of jurisdiction, even though it was like so obvious and they don't even go into it. But like, philosophically, I was just like, what the heck? Like, just because we enter and like cross an arbitrary line, like suddenly a court can, like a police officer can arrest us for something we didn't even know about, and we can put in jail for it. Like, that's not fair. And so like, my notion of like liberty and freedom and autonomy were basically actually somewhat incompatible with the notion of a sovereign government. And this is perhaps a tangent, but like, the idea of a sovereign authority basically like didn't resonate with me. Like, and that it was really reflected in my Christianity, because I basically, as a Protestant, the way I practiced it as I grew into college and adulthood was, I'm gonna do it the way that it makes sense for me. Like, I don't really see this moral teaching being necessary according to like the very word of Scripture, so I'm gonna like leave that one out. And but like, seeds had been planted that like, no, like, even just in our legal system, like the idea of sovereignty is fundamental. Like, you can't have a government without the notion of sovereignty. And like, that's what authority is like, it doesn't matter. Like, it is what it is. Like, if a court orders you to do something, like, you must do it. Like, that is what power is. And obviously God is powerful and God is sovereign, but and so that means like his truths are too. And so the question is like, how do you apply that to the church? And increasingly I came to see like, okay, like the church has authority, because like, that's how the whole world works. Like, there are rules, there are laws, there is a truth, there's a true way, and there is a false way. And that actually helped me come to understand the teaching of the Eucharist, because I was like, okay, well, if the church has because from a Protestant mindset, it's like, okay, well, how do you know, like, let's say that transubstantiation is possible. How do you know on any given Sunday, like, that's actually happening at your church? Because there's like no such thing basically as a guaranteed miracle in Protestantism. And okay, perhaps I'm on a tangent, but basically the idea of authority was critical to my understanding of the Eucharist, because I'm like, okay, so if the church has authority, and if the church says that if you are a priest and you say these words with this matter, the Eucharist will transubstantiate into the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus. Like, if there is that authority, then that's how authority works. Like, it doesn't matter if you agree with it or not. Authority like is sovereign. And so that basically gave me one of the ways to intellectually assent to the Eucharist, and also to the Catholic Church, like having opinions on dogmas, like firm teachings on moral issues, even though they weren't necessarily in the Bible. So I actually think I'm a much better American citizen now that I actually understand authority. Anyways, that's a big tangent. Where am I? So I didn't go into OCIA planning to change my life. Even though I was like, I want to join the church, and I think the church is true, and I think the church has the Eucharist. I was like, yeah, there's also like a lot of moral teachings that I'm not really ready to change my life around. And it was in those OCIA classes where I came to see, okay, like the Eucharist and, these beautiful theological doctrines and the history and like all this all of these are like, they're really unified. Like, the moral teachings are deeply interrelated to the theological teachings that attracted me to the church. And like, I just came to see how these things that seemed arbitrary weren't arbitrary. So like, for example, one thing my OCIA teacher said was that a bishop somewhere had said, been asked like at a youth conference, like, what is the most important rule for us to follow, like for the youth to follow? And he said, the mass obligation. And the mass obligation was certainly one that I was like, that's arbitrary. I'm not going to do that. Like, I don't go to church every Sunday. It's just like, that's too much. And he said that it was the most important in the story because if you're not putting God first on the Lord's Day, then basically you have almost no chance of putting him first any other given day. And, that's what we're to do. It's the first commandment. Like the Lord your God must be above all other things. And that's when I started getting my wheels turning. Like, okay, like, what does it mean to put God first in your life? And obviously that was a big principle in Protestantism as well, in Protestant Christianity. But it wasn't how I was actually living. Like, I would put, and part of it was because I didn't know exactly whether things were wrong or not. Because like, I thought a lot of things were up for debate because my church didn't have super strong teachings on some of these moral issues. And so, yeah, so even though I entered that class kind of being like, yeah, I'm kind of planning to do it, but I might be a bad Catholic, I'm probably going to fall short. Or I'm definitely going to fall short because I'm not planning to not fall short. Over time, I became convinced, like, wow, this is actually, like, these teachings are kind of beautiful and meaningful and important, and if I want to, I can have a new start spiritually. Like, this can be a big, life-changing second chance spiritually. Like, when I was little, I loved God a lot, and like, I would talk to him a lot, and I had this idea, like, I am always going to pick God over any other, like, snare, basically. Like, I'm gonna do that. And I would imagine myself with, like, a big little crown in heaven. And I was like, I know that heaven is more important. And I want to live that way. And I did that a lot. And I think I did it. And, like, even in high school, I remember myself, like, really thinking that way. Like, like I would never, ever, ever accept any amount of money to, like, sin. But yet, there were other things that got me over the years, and I just fell into a lot of worldly ways, and it was because I desired them. It's because I wanted them, and slowly through the graces, I was willing to see, like, maybe it would be better if I didn't do those things. And so I remember taking, like, my first confession. I was so scared. I remember Googling so much, like, how to do a confession, like, how to do a first confession when you're an adult, like, what is going on? I have to confess my whole life. But I prepared. I had my little notebook written out, and I was shaking the whole time. But, my first confession was a really beautiful moment of grace. And it was actually a moment that forever changed my life, I will say, because there was a lot that I wasn't honest with myself about. There were some things where I was like, yeah, I do this, and that's who I am, and that's what I'm doing, and I do these things. But there were other things where I didn't even admit them to myself that I did them. And I really didn't, like, look at myself and be like, you permit yourself to do these things. Like, look at you. And so I got to my first confession, and it was very powerful. And I must say, there are sins that I was very immersed in that I have never once committed after my first confession. The graces of the sacrament are real, and that is a perfect example. And so I was really asking patron saints, Saint Teresa of Avila and Saint John the Baptist, to pray for me before my confirmation and first communion, because I just saw both of them as saints who lived wild lives, but that they were radically themselves. And that's what I wanted. I was like, there's that quote that more later learned from Blessed Carlos Acutis, like, many of us are born originals, but we die photocopies. And, like, I felt that about myself. Like, I knew as a child, like, I was a very unique kid. I just was, like, for better, but mainly for worse, in social situations. Like, I was quite unique. And then, as time went on, I became less unique. And, like, some of those are, like, maturation, but some of those things were because I I didn't preserve a lot of, like, my own natural beauty, because I just, like, let the world, like, have its way with me. And I was like, John the Baptist is someone, like, he was crazy. Like, he was the son of this, like, well-regarded priest, probably, like, like, high up in Israel. And he was going around the desert, like, wearing crazy clothes, eating a crazy diet, saying very provocative things. Obviously was not copying anyone, was quite unique. Um, and yet, like, Jesus gave him some of the highest praise, like, anyone got in, like, the Bible. Like, and Saint Teresa of Avila, like, she was a very unique woman. And, like, she obviously wrote a lot at a time where that, like, women didn't really do that. And she founded orders, and she, like, reformed orders, like, against people's will. But, like, in all of it, she was so on fire and uniquely herself. And, like, that's what I wanted. I was like, I am not that. I am, like, I am a much more boring version of me than I know I can be, because I've just been, like, like, not drilling into the virtue that's gonna, like, unlock my truest self. And I want that. I want to live a great life like these beautiful patrons that I made for myself. And so I was at that point, I was, like, ready. I was like, okay, like, I'm gonna say goodbye to things that the Catholic Church says I should say goodbye to, even though I may not be convinced why. I'm just gonna trust that the Church has wisdom for me. And I'm so glad I did. And the graces of the sacraments were crazy, because I basically, like, I didn't have any family at my confirmation. I just told them I was joining, like, a couple weeks in advance. And so I wasn't making a really big deal about it, because I didn't think it was that big of a deal, because I knew I was already baptized. But then that day, it ended up being, like, the most joyful day of my life. The day that I received the sacrament of the Holy Eucharist for the first time, like, knowingly. I definitely, like, received the Eucharist as a child at a Catholic church, because everyone was like, it's no different, just, like, go ahead. Anyways, but, like, my first communion as a Catholic, like, it was just this beautiful spiritual mountaintop experience that was wholly undeserved and wholly unexpected. But God just, like, poured out so much grace into me, and I've basically just been living a Eucharistic life since, and it's been almost 2.5 years. And that is my story into the church. Still, at that time, I didn't fully intellectually understand the doctrine of Mary. And there were other things that I knew I didn't know for the church. And, like, that was scary for me, like, especially as someone who spent so much time reading and studying, that the fact that I didn't know every single thing, or, like, intellectually, like, assent to every single thing, like, it was a true step of faith, where I was like, I don't have the time, I don't have the bandwidth, I don't have the intellectual capacity in this moment to, plumb the depths of all this church teaching. But I believe it's true, because the church teaches it, and because the church is right on all these other things that I think that have been sort of hidden from, that I didn't know about before. And I later learned that that's what's called Catholic faith, is to have faith in the church. And it is, I think, a grace that I even didn't have my full intellectual capacity, even though I did still have intellectual capacity, when I joined the church, because I was able to just have faith. Like, I don't fully understand why we have all these, feast days for Mary. Like, I definitely understood that she was cooler than I had been told. but I didn't understand everything or why, but I was like, but the church says it's true, like I believe it, and I'll learn the details later, and that has been very special, but a whole other thing. And yeah, I think I'll probably say more in another video at some point, but this has been long enough, and that's basically, in some detail, the story of how I joined the Catholic Church, my conversion story, if you will. And I just want to say it was the most beautiful journey of my life. And not that part. I mean, that part was, it was a good start, but being in the church has been the most beautiful time of my life by a long shot. And it's because Jesus is here. Jesus is here and at work. And he offers us his very self in the Holy Eucharist. And his teachings are truly, they're here. I believe it. I believe it. I'm a very, very happy and proud Catholic. And yeah, I just thank you for listening if you are. And yeah, I guess I'll see you in a future video.